Australia's immigration system is once again at a turning point, and this time, families could be right in the firing line. The Albanese government is looking at ways to bring down migration numbers and get greater control over who comes into Australia and when. Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke was expected to announce a major package of changes last week, but his National Press Club speech was suddenly postponed after some of the proposals were reportedly not finalized. The ABC and The Guardian have reported that among the measures being discussed are tougher rules around family visas, potentially affecting partners, children, and parents of Australian citizens and permanent residents. One proposal that has attracted particular attention is restricting people who arrive in Australia as visitors from applying for certain family visas while they are here. For many families, that could mean a partner or parent having to remain overseas while their permanent visa is processed. So today, we are going to unpack what is actually being proposed, what we know and what we don't know yet, and most importantly, what these changes could mean for Australian families trying to reunite with the people they love. This is the Moving to Australia podcast. I'm your co-host Arun Baylor, and I'm joined by Amitava Dev to discuss the proposed changes. Amitava, let's start by discussing the key question here. Are we looking at a fundamental restructuring of family migration?
Yeah, good morning, Arun. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to a windy day in Sydney and New South Wales and everywhere. Are we looking at a fundamental restructuring of family migration? I would say potentially yes. I think the real issue is not whether an application is lodged onshore or offshore. It is whether the government is moving towards a system where people who enter Australia temporarily, particularly as visitors, are expected to leave Australia before they can pursue certain visa pathways. Now, if you remember, a few episodes back, we discussed about changes to certain onshore visa applications, specifically student visas. So, if you are here um, on a visitor visa, you cannot apply for a student visa. So they are now trying to expand these to other categories. And this will be a significant change if implemented for family migration. And it is a significant change in the way family migration operates in practice. At the moment, subject to visa conditions and eligibility requirements, some people are already in Australia on a visitor visa, can lodge family visa applications onshore, and remain lawfully on a bridging visa while these applications are processed. Now, if the government restricts that ability, then the practical message becomes a visitor is genuinely temporary, and even a subsequent marriage or close family relationship with an Australian may not be enough to convert that stay into an onshore migration pathway. That would create a much clearer separation between temporary entry and permanent migration. And from the government's perspective, this gives Home Affairs a greater control over who remains in Australia and reduces the growth of the bridging visa population. But from the family's perspective, it removes flexibility from the system. So I would describe it as potentially a fundamental restructuring, not necessarily of the family visa themselves, but of where and how people are permitted to access them. Now, this is not yet implemented. This is just something being discussed. And as you said, there was a press club that was going to happen, it got delayed.
So these proposed changes to me come across as a conundrum for Australian citizens. The question I would ask is, should an Australian citizen have to live separately from their partner simply because the permanent visa hasn't been granted yet?
Yeah, this is probably the most difficult part of the debate. Nobody is suggesting that marriage to an Australian citizen should automatically result in permanent residence. The government is absolutely entitled to assess whether the relationship is genuine, whether the character requirements are met, and whether all the other visa criteria are satisfied. But there is a separate question. While the assessment is taking place, should a genuine married couple be forced to live in different countries? Imagine an Australian citizen who has a job, a mortgage, children, elderly parents in Australia. The spouse is overseas or has entered Australia lawfully as a visitor. Now, if an onshore partner visa application is no longer available, that Australian citizen may effectively face a choice: remain in Australia without spouse or leave their own country for an uncertain period while the offshore application is processed. This is not simply an immigration issue, it affects the life of an Australian citizen and it impacts his work, his well being, everything. So there has always been a tension in migration law between the government's right to control entry and the legitimate expectation of Australians that they should be able to live with their immediate family. The difficult policy question is whether migration control should really require genuine Australian families to endure prolonged separation. I think most people would accept rigorous assessment of partner visas. The much harder question is whether physical separation should become part of that assessment process. Or perhaps they should introduce a process where applications are evaluated quickly.
Hmm. It feels like the government is trying to show it is getting tough on migration and trying to curb the migration numbers. But wouldn't restricting family migration undermine skilled migration? For example, if you're a doctor or in the trades business, or even if you're an IT professional, the question would be not whether I can come work and live there, but what happens to my partner?
Yeah, there is a political dimension to this. Migration numbers are under enormous public and political scrutiny recently, if you have been following the news. And governments understandably want to demonstrate that they have control. So, restricting people from arriving as visitors and then moving on to longer term visa pathways, like they have done for student visas that stopped a large number. And of course, it is an obvious way of showing that temporary visas are genuinely temporary. But family migration is a particularly sensitive place to apply that principle. There's also a broader economic consequence, I think. Australia competes internationally for skilled migrants. We want doctors, engineers, nurses, scientists, IT professionals, highly qualified business people. But skilled migrants do not make that decision based only on salary. They ask whether their spouse can live with them, whether their children can join them, and increasingly, what happens to their parents as they grow older. So there is a contradiction if Australia says, we want your skills and we want you to build your future here, but bringing your family together is going to become progressively more difficult. That can make Australia less attractive compared with other countries. Family migration should therefore not necessarily be seen as something separate from skilled migration. In many cases, family security is one of the reasons skilled migrant chooses to move to another country. And of course, government has to manage the numbers. But if the policy response makes Australia a less attractive destination for skilled professionals and their families, then reducing one category of migration could ultimately undermine another. The broader question is whether we should measure migration policy purely by numbers or also by the kind of society and workplace Australia is trying to build.
So, to everyone listening, the most important thing to remember is that these are proposed changes, not a completely new family visa system that is already coming into effect. But the direction is clear. The government wants greater control over migration numbers, and family visas are now part of that conversation. So, to round out the podcast, Amitabh, my final question to you is: shouldn't Australian citizens and permanent residents be allowed to build their lives with their families, or is the government simply responding to political pressure?
I guess it is a bit of both. And my advice to everyone listening would be, if you are thinking of getting your partners or your close family members and everything is there, it's just a matter of putting in the application. You should not wait, because who knows what kind of changes would come into play. And if you get condition 8503, that's it. You cannot lodge an application onshore. So do it sooner as you can. If you think you need to bring your parents now, or your partner is here on a visitor visa and your partner qualifies, just apply. Don't wait.
Well, thank you for your insight, Amitabh. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye.